welcome Zoom people and welcome all of you. And has anybody seen any birds really exciting? Go ahead.
It's not that exciting, but North Bend went up to Penn Cove and to Libby, and at Libby there were plenty of long-tailed ducks, and then a beautiful brant cormorant flew in, and we got a good look at him too.
The other day I was looking out at one of our hummingbird feeders and thought I saw an orange bird. And so it took me a couple of days to confirm by saying to Lance, don't you think that's a rufous? So we had our first rufus appearance.
Congratulations. How many of you have seen rufus? Ah, that's a lot. Did you want to say something, Jim? Did everyone hear that? Did you hear that? Okay. Okay, where did the microphone go? Oh, okay.
I don't know if this is news to anybody, but I've seen a number of oyster catchers. I've seen a number of oyster catchers down by Long Beach or in Penn Cove. And a number of them went over at Hasty Lake, the parking lot. I've seen them flying out over the water there, a number of them, so over the last couple weeks.
Cool. It looks like Sarah has something to say.
Do gray whales count? There were gray whales in Snakeland Cove today. This may or may not belong here, but we got to go up to Rifle, just across the border in BC, last week before, and got to see a northern hawk owl, which is really a treat. And so if anybody really wants to see it, talk to me, because I could tell you where it's been hanging out.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Oh.
Had my first band-tailed pigeon yesterday.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. All right. We have a lot to cover tonight, so we're going to let Joaquin speak to us. Joaquin is our new director, and of course I'm not going to be able to say he's our new director very much longer because he's getting so into it now. So anyway, welcome, Joaquin.
I'm going to use the hand mic. I like the audio of this one better, so I'm going to use the hand mic.
Okay.
So hi everyone, how's everybody doing? Good. So thank you, Patty, for the warm introduction. So for those who do not know me, my name is Joaquin Sweat. I'm the new executive director here at Whidbey Audubon Society. I'd like to give a huge shout out to the whole team. The board of directors has been instrumental in getting me up to speed here at the Audubon Society. It's been a huge help. Thank you to all of you. I will try to talk a little bit slower because they tell me I talk too fast. Yeah, it's been really, truly lovely getting to know each and every one of you, and getting to know all of the people in our community. We did a table recently at Mussel Fest, which almost blew away. And the second day didn't actually work out at all. They stopped the Port Townsend ferry because of wind. But on the first day, I got to know all of the communities of the different nonprofits because we were in the nonprofit alley. So we were right next to the folks of the Ren Fair, who were awesome. Yeah, it's been really, really fun having meetings with the National Audubon, talking about a little bit of the political situation, meetings with the State Audubon, where we're talking with their conservation committee of the Puget Sound region. Jackie invited me to that, and that was very, very fun, very informative. Yeah, it's been really great, and I want to thank all of you guys for coming and showing up tonight, and everybody on Zoom. I'm not sure how many people we've got, but everybody who is coming and to learning about Grebes. 44 people. So thank you to the 44 people who are on Zoom as well. Yeah, I'm really excited to learn about Grebes. When I've talked about it with my friends, most people don't seem to know what Grebes are. I'm not going to tell too much about Grebes because I want Connie to have a chance to explain in fullness. But yeah, I hope you're all ready to learn. Before we begin, quick little side note for business purposes. In order for us to continue providing all the services that we do at the Whidbey Audubon Society, these nights, the birding in neighborhoods events, all of our field trips, tabling at all of the events, Wings Over Whidbey, the Bird in the Hand Festival, these are all great events that we offer for free to the public. But in order for us to continue doing that, we need a complete board of directors, which we do not have right now. So if anybody is interested in joining our board of directors, please do let me know. We've got right now openings for president, secretary, and treasurer. It's not too much work because I'll help take all the weight off your shoulders, and I'm super fun to work with, as is the rest of the board of directors. Really, I want to make it as easy and fun as possible for everybody, basically just getting more involved with the birds of the community. Yeah, you have a question? We meet, we alternate between the Freeland Library and in Coupeville? The Coupeville Library, great. So I believe we alternate between those two. And the meetings are on the fourth Thursday of every month. So it's, it's a super fun time where we talk about all of the birds that we see and get down to business about how we can help the local community and how we can, work in providing all these services to everybody on Whidbey. So yes, if anybody's interested, there's also a QR code on the entry table where if you can scan that, you can fill out a form super easy that just expressing your interest, and we'll have a conversation about it. So yes. Well, I will slow down as I say this final part. Thank you so much to everybody for coming, and have a great evening.
Announcements to make. We'll let Pam Notice speak about Wings Over Whidbey, and she's here.
Okay, hi there. I'm the coordinator. Go up there then. Oh, okay. If they must. I wore my good clothes, so. Hi there. I'm the coordinator for Wings Over Whidbey this year. Oh, I have my notes. Now I can't see them. Okay. The big deal is, as of now, we're $350 over our sponsorship goal of $5,000. Thanks to an anonymous donor who gave us $1,000. Was it this month or last month? I can't remember, but it's awesome. I'm here to not ask for money anymore. I'm here to ask for volunteers. So I just traded contacts with somebody here who is willing to volunteer. We're going to need, Lance, do you need extra help with parking? You just recruited Ellen, so. What's the date? Oh, May 17th. Mark it on your calendar. 11 to 3 at Pacific Rim Institute. Okay, so we may need help with parking. Friday setup. We want to set up as much as we can on Friday. That's reasonable before the event. Saturday setup, starting at 9. The big deal is breakdown. Last year, Stephanie Neese, who coordinated the event, said everybody was too tired to break down. So her husband and her had to come the next day. I'm not willing to do that. I want to be done with it on Saturday. So maybe if we could have fresh people come in to break down, that would be awesome. We need someone to help with vendor check-in. Visitor check-in, Linda Dwight is coordinating volunteers for that. Robin Llewellyn is recruiting specimen volunteers. So my name is on the website. My email is pam@whidbeyaudubonsociety.org. So yes, let me know if you can help, or if you know someone young and robust who can help us, put up tables and put up canopies and move fencing, and, it's a big ordeal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Pam. Pam has agreed to do it this year, and we've got to help relieve her tension. She has a bit of it. Okay, and now I would like Ellen Nelson to talk about Pigeon Guillemot.
Pigeon Guillemot season is coming. Oh, up in front here with Patty.
There you are.
The Pigeon Guillemot season will be opening June 1st, and I was just at our first coordinating committee, and we're putting together the volunteers for each site, and we need volunteers. If you've never been one, you're missing out on a lot of fun and a lot of interesting things. A morning at the beach weekly all summer long, and some fabulous birds. Kathy is laughing out there. Then there are sometimes some rain. But we would really appreciate some additional volunteers, and the training will be in May, mid-May. It's online, and then there's a beach training also. And I'm happy to answer questions. And one person here tonight is already signed up. Thanks a lot.
Okay, and let's see. I want to say that the Semiahmoo trip, which is this Saturday, I still have room for 3 people. So if you're interested in attending, please see me after this meeting, and we can talk about it. And you want to go on and talk about the other trips?
Yeah, there's a Westport pelagic birding trip in August, and Dave Parent has organized it, and it was full, but one person dropped out, so I just wanted you to go to the website and look at that trip in August, which is, where is it? It's August, well, I'll tell, it's go to the August calendar and you'll find it.
Okay, are there any other announcements before the speaker is, could you take this and turn it off, please? Before we introduce the speaker tonight? Anyone else? Okay, Sarah, would you come up?
The pelagic trip is on August 16th. Hi, I'm Sarah again, Sarah Schmidt, and it is my delight to welcome Connie Sidles to teach us again. She, as anybody who's been to any of her classes knows, she's top-notch, incredible educator, and they're always wonderful. And Connie is a master birder, a former board member of Birds Connect Seattle, formerly Seattle Audubon Society, a current member of the Conservation Committee. She's the chair of Birds Connect Seattle's Publications Committee, an environmental educator, and the author of 4 books about nature that focus on the Union Bay Natural Area at the Center for Urban Horticulture, all of which I greatly recommend. She's a wonderful writer. So Connie, we're really excited to have you with us, and we're looking forward to learning about grebes.
All right. Okay, well, thank you very, very much for inviting me here. I always love to spend time with the Whidbey Island Audubon people. I feel like I sort of almost grew up on Whidbey Island. My aunts owned some property there, which is now the Muirkirk Rhododendron Garden. They owned that at one time. And so I spent my summers there in a little hut that is now, I think, the potting shed, without electricity, without running water, and with outhouses. And it was a kid's dream come true, though I think my parents probably would disagree with that. Anyhow, good to be with you again. I'm going to share screen and get started on talking about grebes here. All right. Okay, so There are 22 grebe species in the world, and they all belong in one family called the Podicipedidae, which in Latin, it's Latin for your feet are in your back end, basically. I find that fact to be very curious, and here's why. Grebes all have lobed toes. In other words, they have skin around each separate toe of their feet, as opposed to paddling birds that have web toes. And when you think about it, the web-toed birds of the world, the number is huge. Like in the Anatidae family, which is all the ducks, geese, and swans, there's 160 members. There are more than 30 members in the cormorant family. I haven't been able to count the number of birds in the seabird family or the gull family or all the other web-toed families that exist worldwide. And then here, this little grebe family of 22 species. And it makes me wonder if the idea of lobed toes is why it's not more popular in nature amongst these birds. I don't think there's been any study that I'm aware of that compares the propelling ability of lobed toes to web toes. But there must be something going on because of this disparity in species. This particular picture, though, is a western grebe. I'm sure you recognize it. So some of the grebes in this small family are quite exotic looking. Here's one of my favorites. This is a great crested grebe that you can find in Scotland. Oops, sorry. Here, this one looks like a pie-billed grebe that stuck its head in a porcupine, but it's the hoary-headed grebe, and it is to be found in Australia. Oddly enough, the family that's most closely related to grebes is this one, flamingos. Go figure. I can't figure that one out. But these are according to DNA studies. The biggest grebe in all the world is this one, which looks a lot sort of reminiscent of our redneck grebe, but it's called the great grebe, appropriately enough. It's 30 inches long and weighs 3.5 pounds and can be found in South America, Peru, Chile, and Argentina. The smallest grebe in the world is this one, which is one of our North American grebes, though we don't get this. It's the least grebe, which is only 10.5 inches long and weighs 6 ounces and can be found in Texas and Mexico all the way down to Uruguay. The United States has only 7 species of grebes and Washington has only 6. This is our largest grebe. It's the western grebe, 25 inches long, so not that much smaller than the great grebe, but weighs 3 pounds. This is our smallest grebe, the eared grebe. Isn't that a lovely picture? That's taken by my deceased friend, Greg Thompson. I miss him a lot. But yeah, beautiful bird, 13 inches long and about 1 pound. Our other species, I'll run through these quickly, and then toward the end of my talk, I'll give you some tips on how to identify these different grebes. But here's some closely related bird that's related to the western grebe. This is the Clark's grebe, more of an eastern Washington bird. We have our redneck grebe, which I know we get a lot of on Whidbey. The horned grebe. This is a horned grebe who's showing off to a potential mate, so it looks like he's got mumps, but no. And then the eared grebe, and then the pie-billed grebe. So let's talk a little bit about what makes a grebe a grebe. First of all, probably the most descriptive characteristic about it is they do have their feet located way back on their back ends. So here's a Clark's grebe with its foot sticking up in the air, and you can kind of see the lobed toes here. Each toe is wrapped in skin. This location of their feet makes it very difficult for grebes to walk on land. So here is a western grebe really struggling. They don't do this very much. It's hard to see. I don't know if any of you have ever seen one doing this. Usually when you see them moving around on land or getting up onto their nests out of the water, they flop. But they can walk for short distances if they have to. here's a close-up view of, this is a baby pie-billed grebe, of what those lobe toes look like. Look at the size of that foot. So each toe ends in a little claw here, not really a claw, but more of a nail, and is wrapped in skin. So functionally, these lobed toes work the same as webbed toes. So picture this, you're in the water, you're paddling, locomotion with just your feet. And in order to do that, you have to bring your foot forward and then push back. When you bring your foot forward, you don't want to have a very big foot because of the resistance of water. It's a lot of effort to push something that's wide and flat through water. Just try pushing a plate through water. But when you push back, you want to have maximum coverage, maximum area on your foot to give you the most propulsive power. So in both the cases of webbed feet and lobed feet, these webs or lobes collapse and can be made very, very small when the foot is moving forward, and then it gets bigger as it pushes back. So here's a video that shows this. This is an eared grebe in a rescue situation in a bathtub. So what I want you to look at here, okay, so first of all, notice how far back the feet are. They're like almost coming out of its rear end. And it's got a vestigial toe here that doesn't seem to be much good for anything. But look how it can push its feet out to the side. This is key to how it propels itself through the water. And watch its toes now. So when they push back, the toes are maximum area, and then when the foot is drawn forward, it can collapse. Here is another example of that with a little bit of narration.
Pine-billed grebes can trap water in their feathers, giving them great control over their buoyancy. They can sink deeply or just stay at or below the surface, exposing as much or as little of their body as they wish. This water-trapping ability may also aid in the pursuit of prey by reducing drag in turbulent water.
So, okay, so here, we'll get to the feathers in more detail in a minute here, but here is that pie-billed grebe. And you notice if it wants to, it can put its feet parallel to its body. It doesn't have to swing them out to the side. So the joints there are very flexible. But notice how the foot collapses when it comes forward and opens when it pushes back. Just love that. So here's a skeleton of a typical grebe. And one thing to notice here is here's the sternum. So this is the keel of a bird. This is where the flight muscles attach. Anytime you see a big flat bone like this, it means that you've got big muscles attaching. So it's not that grebes can't fly, they can. But look at this area back here. This is the pelvic girdle, and you can see how big it is. It's very elongated and it's wide too. And so this tells you with this skeleton, this is quite unusual for birds. Now, I don't know of another bird that really has this. That again, these are powerful muscles that are going to be attached all through here, again, helping this bird propel through the water. So although grebes can certainly fly, they tend to be rather weak flyers. And instead, they depend more on their feet and paddles to paddle them both on the surface of the water and underwater. So because they're such weak flyers, they're pretty heavy birds too for their size. They can't really take off directly from the water. They have to run along the water, flapping their wings, sort of like an avian 747 trying to take off. That kind of behavior is common for big birds. I think about, for example, swans and how they have to run through the water first before they can take off. Or even a big duck like a common merganser has to do that as well. So it's not really that surprising that a western grebe like this one would have to do it. It's a pretty good-sized sized bird and weighs pretty much, for a bird, a lot. So it splashes through the water to get off the ground, I should say to get airborne. But even a little grebe does that. So this is a pie-billed grebe. And it cannot shoot itself up out of the water at all. It has to run along the water. In fact, it's rare to see these pie-billed grebes fly at all. I talked to Dennis Paulson, my master birder mentor, about this, and he's one of the foremost ornithologists in the state, and he said that although he'd been birding since he was a kid, it was years and years before he ever saw a pie-billed grebe fly. So if you've ever actually seen one flying, they kind of look like gray footballs with a little bit of feet sticking out the back, then you're pretty lucky. But usually what you see instead is this sort of half flight where they run like crazy, they flap their relatively short wings, they look like they're putting in a lot of effort, they're about to get airborne, they're almost going to make it, and then floop, they flop right into the water. So here is in case you haven't seen that, here's one doing that. Notice he never lets go of his fish. And are you going to get airborne? Are you going to do it? You can do it. No. And still holding the fish. So grebes have, as that other video started to mention about the feathers, grebes have unusual feathers. First of all, they're extremely dense and numerous. On average, they have 20,000 feathers only, even though they're not really super huge birds. That is the highest number of feathers for their size among all the birds. And many of the feathers are curved. So here you see a redneck grebe, and it's holding one of its feathers here. You can notice the curve here in this feather. So one question you might ask is, why is that? And I suspect, although I'm not aware of any science that has examined this in grebes, but they have examined it in penguins, that what grebes can do is they can control their feathers to raise them up or put them down. All birds can do that. But with these curved feathers, what happens is if they want to, they can, as they raise up their feathers, air gets trapped in between each feather shaft here. So picture each feather kind of trapping air here. And then when they put their feathers down again, it's like putting a cap on top of a milk bottle. It traps the air at the base of the feathers. And when they go underwater, that it's thought anyway that the bubbles that come out of those air pockets smooth the friction of their movement through the water. So they leave little trails of bubbles most of the time, as penguins do as well, as they glide through the water, because these are fish-eating birds and they hunt their prey down mostly by chasing it underwater. So it's very useful to have the ability to slide through the water as easily and quickly as possible without wasting too much effort. So they can compress their feathers, as this pie-billed grebe is about to do, and squeeze out all that air. You can kind of see the curvature of the feathers here. And they can sink down like a submarine. So here he goes down, down, and they could go all the way under. They don't have to, but they can also float like a submarine here. So they have great control over their buoyancy. They can also, if they want to, they can dive straight in like buffleheads do, or like the other diving ducks do. You can see this is a horned grebe doing just that. So when they dive like that, they raise themselves up out of the water, point their bills down, and dive in, pushing up with their feet like this. So why would a pie-billed grebe decide to go down, like this, as opposed to this? I don't have an answer to that. I have no idea why they decide to do that. I suspect that sometimes when they're doing their submarine diving, they are being wary of maybe a perceived danger or something that puts them on alert, such as you looking at them, or a photographer perhaps, and they want to be ready to go underwater and escape without making a big fuss, but they're not really quite ready to do that. That might be part of why they do it, but honestly, I just don't know. I have a very quick video that shows them diving this way. You have to watch carefully because it goes fast. There's the grebe. I'll move this out of the way. Are you ready? And down he goes. We'll watch that again. So again, they can sink slowly or fast, whichever they prefer. So one of the notable things about grebes and feathers is grebes often feed feathers to themselves and also to their young. So here you see a pie-billed grebe on a nest. They build floating nests, and I'll get to more detail of that in a second here. The youngsters of grebes are often striped like zebras. So here's some baby pie-billed grebes, and here's one of the parents feeding a feather to its youngster. Here's another one that's going to either take it away and try to eat it or what. It's really kind of uncertain. We don't really know why they do this. I've read some scientific reports that say that babies this size need the feathers for the protein or other nutrients in feathers. So you wouldn't think of feathers as, I mean, it's not tofu after all. Other people, I've read reports that say that because these birds eat fish whole, the bones might be kind of difficult to deal with inside their bodies and might pierce their tender stomachs or something like that, because fish bones can be sharp. And so the feathers are used to line the stomachs. I didn't buy any of that. I just didn't think that sounded very, very likely. The latest one that I've heard of, though, might make more sense, although, again, it's a little bit on the speculative side. And that is that it's thought that when these feathers are collected inside the bird, they form a kind of a ball and can slow digestion. So the feathers enter a three-part stomach. The first part is a kind of a storage chamber. The second part of the stomach is a gizzard, and then the third part is a kind of pouch. And the feathers are all in a kind of a gummy ball. And as the food goes in, that is to say the fish, it slows digestion and enables the birds to digest their food better. Maybe they can get along on not having to catch quite so many fish because they thoroughly digest the fish. Or maybe they just, they can digest some of the bones, not all of them though, because eventually what happens is the indigestible parts of the fish are collected along with that ball, and then they are coughed up, just like owl pellets. The indigestible parts of food can be regurgitated within the ball of feathers, sometimes as many as 6 balls in one evening. So that's quite a bit. Most grebes have extremely elaborate, ritualistic ways of, these are 2 western grebes feeding feathers to their chick too. They have very elaborate courtship rituals. Here are 2 western grebes demonstrating. I'll show you a video in a minute of a couple of them. What's really interesting to me about this behavior is, I think we all know about western grebes doing this. I don't know how many of you have seen this in real life. I've seen videos. But even a bird like a pie-billed grebe, which is so, how should we say this? Plain might be a good way, or nondescript. Even they have elaborate courtship rituals, and this was discovered by Martin Miller, who spent a lot of his time at Green Lake in Seattle walking around looking at grebes. He had a lot of free time during the day, and so he became really a world expert on grebes, pie-billed grebes, that is, and he told me all about their courtship ritual, which is, like he said, it was like watching a minuet, a very elaborate but slow dance. So what they'll do is they'll circle each other, and they'll put their 2 bills together, pointing at each other, and then they'll slowly circle round and round like a rotating toy. That's one of the things they do. They'll go side by side as well and do other things too. But it's that circle that I think is really interesting. So next time you see a pie-billed grebe pair, and you know what they call like. They make that kind of hooty call that signals that they want to get together, and they're doing that now, by the way. Maybe stick around for a while and see if you can't see them performing at least part of that courtship ritual. But in the meantime, let's watch a couple of Clark's grebes, which are, as I say, closely related to Western grebes. So redneck grebes have also elaborate courtship. I thought you might like to look at this video that shows what they do. They're not as elaborate as the Western or Clark's grebe, but they have their own dance. You saw how short those wings were. I think it must be the two males fighting while the female looks on. I've always wished that we could have time machines. I'd love to go back in time and see a couple of Tyrannosaurus rexes doing their courtship behavior, bobbing their heads and copying each other. I'm sure they did that. So grebes build floating nests oftentimes hidden, sometimes out in the open. So this picture was taken at Montlakeville. And you can see this pie-billed grebe has built a floating nest here. The problem with a floating nest, of course, is that it tends to sink. So these birds keep adding to the nest and moving the eggs as the nest gets waterlogged underneath, long enough for the eggs to hatch. So females lay up to 1 to 10 eggs for each clutch, depending on the species. Pie-billed grebes can lay up to 10. Eared grebes 1 to 8. It kind of depends on each bird. So here we have one with 5. They lay the eggs sequentially, as all birds must. The females can lay 1 egg a day, basically. So birds in general have 2 strategies for how they incubate the eggs. One strategy is to say, okay, I'm not going to incubate the eggs at all. And the embryos inside are not going to develop at all until I start sitting on them. And I'm going to wait until I lay the last egg, and then I'll sit on all of them at once, and they all hatch at once on the same day. Grebes don't do that. Instead, grebes will lay 1 egg, and they'll start incubating it right away, and then the next day the female lays another egg, and that one is also incubated, and so on until more than a week can pass, depending on the number of eggs. Both parents, by the way, do help with this, and so when it's time to hatch, the first egg that's laid hatches first, and so on. And so what happens is the pie-billed grebe parents cannot leave the nest until the last egg hatches. So here you see a baby, 1, 2, 3, and it looks like 2 more eggs are still to be hatched. I think this is the same nest that we just saw. And here's the parent trying to take care of these 3 youngsters that are already hatched and already need food and already dependent on the parents to bring them food, but they can't go anywhere until the last 2 eggs hatch out. And I don't know why that strategy is so popular with grebes. I do know, at least for some reasons, why the wait until they're all laid before you brood strategy works. Think about wood ducks or hooded mergansers, for example, that nest in tree cavities way up off the ground. And the babies, once they hatch, the female ducks cannot bring food to the nest, so the babies have to leap out of the nest and follow their mom on the ground to the nearest water. So it's not going to work if the mom has to do that every day for each new hatchling. So instead, she waits to brood them until they can all hatch at once, and then they can all jump out of the tree at once. Most grebes, if not all grebes, here's one feeding a feather again. So this is redneck grebe nest. Will, once all the babies are hatched, will take them immediately away from the nest. And this is true for pretty much all birds that I know of. All birds want to leave the nest as fast as possible. Why? Because nests are dangerous places. So next time the New York Times puzzle master puts down a four-letter word meaning haven, and then the answer is nest, you need to write them a letter and say, no, nests are not havens. Nests are dangerous places that attract predators and that attract parasites. So all birds want to leave the nest as fast as possible, but not all of them can do it that fast. So think about allotricial birds like robins, where the youngsters are in a tree somewhere or a bush, but off the ground. They hatch with eyes closed and naked, no feathers. They're not going anywhere. Marbled murrelets, 50 miles away from their normalized habitat of water, they're not going anywhere till they can fly. But as soon as they can leave the nest, they do. And in the case of grebes, when they're all hatched out and the whole family is ready to leave, the youngsters can swim right away. But to stay warm and protected, oftentimes they will climb up on their parents' back and nestle in amongst the feathers. They do this both for protection and to stay warm. I have a video to show that. So here is an eared grebe at the nest. You can see it's a floating nest. I'm going to turn the sound down. So one baby has hatched, two more still have to come out. Here's one struggling to get up there. Not that easy to do. Here are the parents kind of changing places. Notice how floppy this grebe is in getting up. I guess you didn't see it. Yeah, they can stand, but they don't do it very much, and they don't walk very much. Feet are too far back on their bodies. There is one of the pairs bringing more stuff to build up the nest so it doesn't sink. Here's the baby struggling to get up there. Did you see that leap? So usually what happens when the youngsters are all ready to leave, they go off on their parents' back like this. And the youngsters stay at the surface, although they can dive, and they will sometimes practice diving. They're not really diving for a purpose except to get used to the idea of diving and maybe build up some of their diving muscles. But instead what they do basically is wait at the surface for the parent to come back and feed them food, as you see here. So birds are born with enough DNA information to tell them how to be the bird they're supposed to be. In other words, how to fly, how to roost at night, how to find food, what food is good, what food isn't good, basically how to be the bird that they're supposed to be. On the other hand, they all also have to experience a learning curve. So it's kind of like a two-part system where they're born knowing what they're supposed to do, but maybe they don't quite get it all together. That's especially true for birds that are predators. So all grebes are predators. Just like all raptors are predators, and a lot of the diving ducks too. And every one of them it faces the same issue of how you learn to fly properly, how you learn to catch your food properly, and how you especially learn how to take care of your young when you're a first-time parrot. So here is a pie-billed grebe parent who is probably a first-year parent and has caught a fish and is trying to feed it to this youngster. This picture was at Montlake Phil. And look at the size of that fish. So here's the baby saying, "You want me to do what?" So this particular set of parents, they just didn't understand that they couldn't catch any old fish. They had to catch the fish of the right size for the poor baby to swallow. And this mom, who caught this enormous fish, presented it to this baby. And of course, the baby couldn't do a thing about it. And so she turned around, and there were a line of 4 other babies behind her, and she tried to feed the fish to each one of those 4 babies. But of course, it was the same result. None of them could eat it at all. And you could tell she was kind of wondering, what's wrong? And she finally ate the fish herself. But she did learn, and so did the dad, and eventually they managed to figure out that they were catching the wrong size fish. I saw something similar, which has a little bit of a sadder tale, with in this same pond, by the way. This is Carp Pond at Montlake Phil, where the new time parents built their nest, their floating nest, not well enough protected by the cattails and a little bit too close to the shore. And they built this nest very carefully. They did a good job building the nest. The female laid, I think if I recall properly, 4 eggs. And then in the night, raccoons came and drove the parents off the nest and ate all the eggs. So it was early enough in the breeding season for those 2 parents to try again. And this time when they built their nest, they put it more properly farther away from shore, and they became quite successful. So as I say, it's a bit of a learning curve. So, as I said, both parents care for the chicks, and they're very good parents. They protect their young. They make sure that they stay warm, and they make sure that they get fed, although I'm not sure what these 2 youngsters are going to do with this fish here. Nevertheless, there are about a third of the worldwide species of grebes are endangered. In Washington State, western grebes and Clark grebes both are listed by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife as, quote, candidates for listing, meaning that they're in a bit of trouble. And it's due to a couple of factors. One is, which surprised me a little bit, but nesting habitat loss in Washington State due to water drawdowns of reservoirs. So grebes like to nest for the most part in calm ponds or small lakes. And a lot of these are connected to a water system that is fed by our dam system and reservoirs. And if our climate is experiencing drought, then oftentimes the reservoirs are drawn down in order to help the farmers, and also to help salmon for that matter. And that does not work very well for grebe nests. The grebes need to be in water that is sort of predictable in terms of its depth, because of their floating nests. So this aspect of climate working in tandem with human intervention is been bad news for nesting grebes in our state. And of course, the climate change in ocean warming is a real serious threat as well, as it drives the grebe's favorite fish into waters that are away from their habitat, from the Grebes habitat, or especially down deeper in colder water, because these are mostly, at least especially in the wintertime, cold water fisher birds. So if these grebes can dive fairly deeply and can hold their breath for 30 seconds or so, but if the schools of fish that they feed on are disappearing because of the fish are going elsewhere or they're too deep, then these birds get in trouble. That is true for all of our fish-eating seabirds, and that's probably the worst problem of all because we don't really know too much about what to do with it. There was a great concern many years ago about the western grebes that would overwinter at Quartermaster Harbor off of Vashon Island in large numbers. And they began to dwindle and then pretty much, for all intents and purposes, disappear. And the birders, I remember at the time, we were kind of just wringing our hands saying, oh my gosh, the western grebes are disappearing. What do we do? It's just as horrible. The population has crashed. That wasn't, strictly speaking, as true as we thought it was, because it turned out that they were following the herring, and the herring had gone down to California for whatever reason, and the grebes followed. So the western grebes, at least, were not in as much trouble as we had feared. So that was a bit of a reprieve. This is a grebe that has gone extinct. And I wanted to tell you its story is a kind of a cautionary tale. So this is it's related to the pie-billed grebes. It's called the Atitlan grebe, and it was present only in Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. So this is one of the few pictures I could find of it. I couldn't find a color picture. It was found only in that one lake, a very specialized species, and it did okay in that lake, even though it was in such a precarious place evolutionarily, you have to admit. But then smallmouth and largemouth bass were introduced into the lake, and those bass ate the crabs and fish that the grebes depended on, and they also ate young grebes. And so this really impacted the grebe population there, and they were going extinct. So people got together and said, well, we can't have that, and they created a refuge breeding program for the Atitlan grebe that was started in 1966. And it was actually pretty successful. They were able to get the refuge grebes to breed, and the species was coming back, and everything was looking pretty rosy until 1976, when a massive earthquake fractured the lake bed where the refuge was, and the lower lake levels resulted, making it harder and harder for the grebes to nest. And by 1983, only 32 individuals were left. And they had started to hybridize with pie-billed grebes. The last two Atitlan grebes were seen in 1989, and they're declared extinct when those two birds disappeared. So we have to keep that in mind, I think, for monitoring the success of all these different grebes that are in our state, and pay attention to what we can do to try to help them. It's a big conservation issue, and I know Whidbey Island is interested in this too, so that's why I'm telling it to you. So now I'm going to go through and tell you the different grebe species that occur in Washington, and some pointers on how to ID them. I'll start here with the western grebe. This is our largest. And you notice here that it has a very robust bill. It's kind of a pale yellow color. But notice here, especially in breeding plumage, the black crown goes down to the forehead all the way down to meet the bill, the skin part of the bird. And the black goes below the eye here, especially black in the lores. That is diagnostic. So here is another western grebe. This picture was taken off the dock at Montlake Phil. The bill looks a lot brighter yellow than it really was. You can see that there's kind of a yellow cast to this picture. I think it was taken close to sundown, so that colored that. But look at here's the forehead going down to black to meet the bill, and then black under the eye. So here you get one in winter, and you just kind of have to shake your head and say, okay, But again, we see that in wintertime, there are some white feathers that replace the black, but the black is still kind of faintly there beneath the eye, quite a bit beneath the eye here, and down to the forehead, so that helps. I showed you this picture because, again, here is a western grebe, and you can see the black below the eye. Remember when we were watching those Clark's grebes do their dance, and it looked like they hardly had any kind of wings at all, sort of like waterborne ostriches. But that's because when they did that courtship ritual, they cricked up their wings, so it made them look like they were really very, very short. That's not the case. This is the true length of grebes, western grebes' wings, and Clark's grebes too, for that matter. So they're not trivial wings exactly, but keep in mind this is a heavy bird. And although it can fly, it spends most of its time not flying. I remember, as a matter of fact, being out at Montlake Phil one time, and I looked across at the 520 bridge, which was about, I don't know, half a mile away or more, and I saw a western grebe there, and it was paddling to the west, which was coming toward me. So it reached where I was at the far eastern end of the loop trail on Montlake Phil. And it kept going. And I thought, well, I'm going to walk along with it and see where it goes. So I kept pace with it. My walking speed was about the same as its paddling speed. And we just both kept going until we reached the farthest lagoon, the pond farthest west at the site, which I call the lagoon. And there the western grebe stopped paddling and began to fish. So I thought this was interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, that grebe could have flown there much faster and probably with less effort, I'm thinking. I mean, that was a long paddle. It took about 20 minutes. So that was one thing that occurred to me. The other thing that occurred to me was the notion that this bird knew what it was doing. It could anticipate what it would find at that lagoon. It knew where it wanted to go. It knew why it wanted to be there. And it was hopeful, I guess you could say, that it would find the fish that it was seeking. And that level of cognition in birds at the time when I thought this thought was poo-pooed by a lot of scientists because they were thinking, you know, bird brains are small and, yeah, sure, crows are smart and parrots are smart, but everybody else is a kind of a dinky bird brain. I don't think that view is changing considerably now with all the research being done on bird cognition, even of very small-brained birds like chickadees and so on. So the more that we explore that, and especially the more that we can put together the anatomy of birds with their behavior, I think the more we'll find out that birds are a lot smarter than we thought. They have more individuality than we thought. They have more volition, that is to say, free will than we thought. And altogether, they're just a lot more fun. This is often a posture you'll see in western grebes. This is how they sleep when they're floating. So you can see, again, the neck is all gone here, basically, but here's that black below the eye. Here's the Clark's grebe. So this one is real similar to the western grebes. It's a little bit smaller, but of course you couldn't see that in the field. Its bill is more of an orangey yellow, and in breeding plumage in particular, this gets a little bit brighter. But look at what happens to the black here. It goes above the eye. So the net effect of that is to make this face here look much whiter than with the western grebe. So here's another view of a Clark's grebe, and again, it too has the black coming down here, but because there's no black lore, it looks much narrower at this part of its forehead, and here's that black above the eye. And here's that orangey yellow bill. The other thing about these Clark's grebes, which I think is a little bit harder to see in the field, but still present, so something to check out on, is they tend to have lighter feathers, especially on the back and on the flanks. So here is another example of a Clark's grebe, and you can see again that narrow band of black here and then white above the eye, general sense of whiter face and an orangier bill. This one, you know, oh my goodness, I don't like this one very much. You have to have faith that National Audubon knows what it's looking at. But I don't like the fact that there's so much black right in here and the white is so obscured here by some black feathers. That ain't good. But I would say probably if I had to come down to it, I would agree this is a Clark's grebe for the following reasons. First, the bill is that orangey yellow, not the pale yellow that you would expect in a Western. Secondly, you could sort of argue that there's not really much black, just a couple of stray feathers below the eye. And third, there is a real contrast here between the black of the nape and the gray of the body and paler flanks. So here's a side-by-side comparison of those two faces. We have the Western grebe on the left and the Clark's grebe on the right. So one question you might ask yourself is, do these birds hybridize? And the answer is not very much, but they can. So every once in a while, you're going to see what looks like kind of a mess. And I think when that happens, the best thing you can tell yourself is, I'm going to look at another bird because I can't really make that much of a distinction. And you will get cases sometimes where there's a lot more white on the Western grebe than you would like, and a lot more black on the Clark grebe than you're really happy with. And the bill color, it might be winter, so they're both kind of faded, and good luck with that. And that did happen one time at Montlake Phil, where we had a grebe like this, and all the birders studied it. I even had Dennis Paulson come down and look at it because it was just so difficult to tell. We finally concluded that it was most probably a Clark's grebe, which of course is an extreme rarity in Western Washington. Here is a side-by-side comparison of the bodies, and you can see here, again, we start with the bill. I always start with the bill, and you see this paler yellow on the part of the Western grebe on the left, orangier yellow on the right with the Clark's grebe. Differences in the face here, much whiter on the Clark's grebe, much grayer on the Western grebe because of that black below the eye. And then we come down here to the body, and you can see here on the Clark's grebe on the right how much of a contrast there is between the gray of the back and these paler flanks compared to the black of the nape, whereas with the Western grebe on the right, it's a little bit more similar in coloration, especially the nape in the back. So when you are comparing gray colors in the field, and blacks too for that matter, like let's say you're looking at the wingtips of gulls and trying to decide if those wingtips really are black, or if they're kind of more of a dark charcoal gray. So you're looking at the difference between, let's say, a herring gull and an Olympic gull, which is a hybrid between Western and Glaucus winged, or you want to see if maybe a Glaucus winged is all that pure pale gray on the wingtips. How do you do that? When you're looking at different lighting conditions. And what I do if I am in that situation, which I frequently am, not only do I compare the colors of these neutral colors that are dark black and the gray here to themselves on the same bird, but I'll try to find a bird nearby that has a true dense black. And then I'll see is the rest of the bird on the back of these Western or Clark's grebes, is that sort of closer to that, or is it more of a paler gray? All right, here we come to a bird that's a lot easier on us. This is the redneck grebe. And you can see here it's got the typical grebe bill for these larger grebes, not like pie-billed grebes, but, you know, long and saber-like. This one has his head feathers up, probably because it is interested in a mate, but black on the crown, and then this enormous paler cheek patch, which can look quite white in certain lights, but is certainly a big contrast between the dense black of the crown, and then the neck, the red neck that gives it its name, inbreeding plumage. So it's hard to tell the males from the females. I think the males are slightly bigger. But here you see a pair, and again, we start with the bill, and it's that saber-like bill. In this case, with these particular grebes, the bill color does not help you, so we're going to disregard that. And we start with we work our way back through the bird, and we see black on the forehead here, going all the way back to the back of the crown. Then that whitish, big cheek patch actually goes all the way back to the back of the nape here and under the chin. real distinction between that line of whitish and the redneck that gives it its name. Otherwise, kind of a cinnamon color down to the breast and pretty nondescript otherwise. Here's another view of a redneck grebe in breeding plumage with the youngsters. You see, just like the pie-billed grebes, they're stripy. Here is that same grebe, the redneck grebe in winter plumage. And again, we start with the bill. It's not going to tell us very much except that it's probably a grebe. Notice how much the crown has faded now. It's not that dense black that we saw here, but it's more of a gray. The cheek patch is still there in all its glory. We still see it under the chin. We see a big cheek patch going all the way to the back of the nape here. But look how dull it's become. It sort of looks smudgy. And the red neck is faded too. So why am I showing you this? I don't know. That's weird. That one got in there by accident. So oftentimes in our part of the world, we will see redneck grebes, especially in, let's say, January, that are either coming in or going out of breeding plumage, and they sort of look half and half. Don't be dismayed by that. So just remember, you're looking for, starting with the bill, the kind of saber-like bill here, and then the crown, dark crown, which could be either black and more in breeding plumage or more of a kind of grayish brownish, as you see here. And then this cheek patch that stands out so much in contrast. And then the neck can be either grayish or brownish, as you see here. Here's one in full winter plumage, and you can see the red has faded altogether, but we still have those same patterns of color. Dark on the head, white cheek patch, white under the chin here, and now white in the front here, which was paler cinnamon in breeding plumage, and dark on the neck. There's another view of a red-necked grebe in winter. Here's what one looks like flying. You don't see that much. I think I actually see red-necked grebes flying more than most of the other grebes do. But white here on the leading edge near the tertials, and white trailing edge on the secondaries going back to the tertials here is quite prominent. And then straight neck, slightly down curved here, which you see a lot with loons flying as well, and feet sticking out behind. All right, here we have the horned grebe and in breeding plumage. And we start here with, this is one of the smaller grebes. We start here with the bill, and notably on these horned grebes, the bill tip is ivory white. And this is true in all plumages. And if you look for it, it really stands out. So it's very helpful as a field mark. The rest of the bill is dark. And then black on the head from the forehead all the way down to these cheek pouches here, under the chin and so on, but broken up by these beautiful blonde feathers that give it its name. They're not horns, they just sort of look like horns, I guess. So here's a pair in breeding plumage. This is a little bit of a transition here, so I'm not sure. Greg took this picture. We tend not to see horned grebes in full breeding plumage in Western Washington because they don't breed here, but we'll oftentimes see them mostly in breeding plumage, either in the fall when they get back here or in the spring when they're changing over into breeding plumage and about to leave. And so you'll oftentimes see them with this mixture of white somewhere on their bodies, but especially down at the waterline. But otherwise they're the same. So here's that tip, that little tip of ivory that you can see. It really does stand out, but you have to look for it. And here they can raise up or put down these horned feathers as they please, so that it can make it look like in this one here, like almost a stripe here, but it's not. It's still that basic horn. You can see how much this bird is in transition. It's just got a little bit of its red. Whether it's going towards spring or away from fall, I don't know. Here's, it can inflate these feathers here so they look pouchy, these dark feathers. Here is the horned grebe that we tend to see a lot more of in the winter, winter plumage. This is a fully changed over bird in full winter plumage. Again, you can see it still retains that ivory tip here, but it's changed over. It's beautiful colors of blonde and black and cinnamon into just plain old dark gray and white. So it starts at the forehead here and goes in with a black or grayish cap all the way to the back here, and then white face going all the way to the back of the nape, and then the back of the neck, the nape, is dark. Well, I think I have a picture showing there's a dark line going down here like a western grebe, and white in the front, and otherwise more or less gray on top, and kind of a charcoaly mixture of gray and white feathers at the waterline going all the way back to undertail coverts, which are white. You can oftentimes see a white circle here. I think you have to look for that. I don't often see that. Let's see. Yeah, it can show up sometimes or not sometimes. So I'd have to go through my notes and see how often I see that kind of white patch. Not very often. Here is one swimming. You can see its feet way back on its rear end here, like typical of so many grebes. So we start with the bill, and again, white tip here, dark cap, white, and grayish neck. Here's what it looks like from the front. Here you can see those white patches, white circles. Here's the back of the bird. So when I'm out with beginner birders or intermediate birders, even sometimes people will ask me, is that what is that out there? Is that a western grebe? Because you get a view like this, and this is what the western grebe looks like, sort of. Although in the western grebe, this nape here of dark is much narrower, but it can be easy to mistake, surprisingly, even though there's a huge difference in size. And also a huge difference in bill length. Look at that. And in many other features, but at a distance, it can be kind of easy to make that mistake. Here is a horned grebe in flight, and again, you can even see the white tip here, but black on the crown, white underneath, black on the nape. And it too has a trailing edge on the secondaries and tertials of white. It lacks that white leading edge here, though, that the redneck grebe had. So here is the eared grebe in full breeding plumage. And what should we notice here? We start with the bill, and notice there's no white tip here. It's just a dark bill. Also notice that this bill is tipped up. Not that it really is tipped up, it just sort of looks like it's tipped up because the lower mandible is tipped up, as you see here. So it gives the whole appearance that this bird is a happy bird who's smiling. And of course, that's not really true. Otherwise, black on the forehead, black on the crown, black, 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 all the way down the neck, the breast, and onto the back here. And here is these cinnamon kind of feathery feathers, if you might say, that seem to sprout from the eye, that gives it its name of eared grebe. Why do these look like ears? Because they're not. The bird's ear is actually kind of right about here or so, but hidden by all the feathers, so it's not really an ear. These eared grebes, though, can change their feather shape, like so many birds can, really all birds. He can lift up his front feathers here if he wants to, or keep them flatter. I don't think I might have yeah, here's one that's flatter. He can spread these, the eared feathers out or scrunch them up if he wants to. But again, we start with the bill here, and it's dark at the tip, dark bill altogether, black, 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 blonde on these so-called ear feathers, black neck on front and back, black back, and then chestnut on the flanks. It's another view of that, and you see all those field marks. Here's a front view. And another side view. And here we have a close-up of the horned grebe in breeding plumage. So, I mean in winter plumage. And again, like the eared grebe, it loses pretty much all its color and goes to shades of blackish, grayish, and white. So here is a a side view, and you see the bill has changed color. That happens sometimes in birds. They change their skin color on their bills or sometimes on their feet and legs as well. And you see this has become quite pale, but there's no real distinction here at the tip. I mean, it's just, I suppose you could argue that it's sort of an ivory tip, but it really isn't. It's just part of the whole bill color that is the same. Otherwise, blackish, grayish on the forehead, and going back to the nape here down the, you can just make it out here down the back of the neck here. White patch here, but notice the patch is different, and I'll show you a comparison in a second here. This part down here is reminiscent of where the eared feathers were, and that is a diagnostic field mark for this bird. So again, you can see there's even faint traces of brownish here on this one. But darkish bill, or bill all the same color, no white tip, dark on the head, white underneath here on the chin, going back similar to the horned grebe, but more of a dark downturn here, almost like a U from the crown. Otherwise, white on the foreneck, black on the hind neck, dark on the top here. Now, the bird books make frequent reference to this feature here, where the whitish feathers at the waterline go swooping up here on the eared grebe, and they would be straighter on the horned grebe. I have trouble with this field mark. I have trouble seeing it. Sometimes it seems to me that it has a lot to do with the way these birds hold their feathers, or how much they are sunk into the water. So where's the water line here, and so on. That can vary. Boy, the bird books just swear by this. And I'll show you a couple pictures, and you can kind of be the judge. Here's what the back looks like. White undertail cover. It's kind of fluffy. Here is the eared grebe in flight. You can still see the reminiscent of the eared blonde feathers here. Again, like so many of these grebes, white trailing edge on the secondaries down to the tertials. So here's a comparison of the horned grebe on the left and the eared grebe on the right in breeding plumage. And you can see there's no way that you're going to mistake these, right? But let's look at it anyway. Okay, we start with a white tip on the horned grebe, not there on the eared grebe. It's all black. The eared grebe is black on the head all the way. I mean, from the forehead down through the back of the nape, all the way down through the neck, the starting just kind of by the chin here, and down the front here, all the way down to the breast. And with the horned grebe on the left, it's the black stops. It stops here after these little pouches go away, and you get this strong line between the cheek part of the horned grebe and the neck, and that's just not present in the horned grebe, in the eared grebe. So that's the difference. Now here are two of these grebes, these little grebes together in winter, and the horned grebe is on the left, the eared grebe is on the right. And you can see why I don't like that field mark here, because here we have the horned grebe with this kind of swooping up here, and the eared grebe is kind of, it looks so smudgy. I'm not sure what you would see from a distance. How far does it go up? But it looks so similar to this that I don't like that field mark. I go instead by the bill, which is not just the fact that it's got a white tip on the horned grebe and not on the not white tip on the eared grebe, but also the shape of the bill is really different. On the horned grebe, the bill on the upper mandible and the lower mandible is pretty symmetrical. It's about the same width and about the same shape too. There's not a whole lot that's different here if you look at it. But on the eared grebe on the right, you see the bill has a lot of differences in upper and lower mandible. First of all, the upper mandible kind of swoops down and is not particularly straight, especially up here by the high forehead, but the lower mandible swoops up, especially as you get near the tip here, and it's thinner overall. So if you look at the difference, you can see the bill shape is really, really different, and that's extremely helpful. The other thing that I look at a lot is what's going on right in this part of the bird, the auricular patch, or the cheek patch, we might say. And on the horned grebe, head is kind of divided in half pretty evenly. The top half is black or charcoal dark gray, and more or less the bottom half is white, going all the way to the back of the neck here where you get that thin line. And with the eared grebe, in all plumages, that's really not quite the truth. Instead, you get this kind of little U-shaped swoopy business going down here of dark that compromises what would otherwise be half the top head being dark and half the bottom head being light. It's just not like that. So those are the two main differences that I see. Okay, now we're going to come to pie-billed grebe, and here you see a typical pie-billed grebe in breeding plumage. The bill is real different for a grebe, isn't it? It's very short, and here is the stripe that gives it its name, pied-billed. Pied means more than one color, like dark and light. This changes in breeding plumage. It gets a little bit wider and darker. It's different between males and females, and good luck trying to find that out. But Martin insists that that's true, and I would encourage you to pay attention to that and see if you can discern it, because I can't, but maybe you can. He says that the male's bills are thicker, so noticeably thicker, according to him. But then we go around to the head here, and we see it's kind of a nondescript, sort of grayish, big white eye line, black under the chin. And here is another example of that. So here's the pied bill, kind of a palish blue, dark everywhere. Really, it's a very plain bird, but black under the chin here, going all the way almost to the down the neck, really. Fluffy otherwise. This is what they look like in winter, or and you see the black is much diminished. This stripe here has gone away. This is probably a first-year bird also. So here you see two of them doing their mating dance. They have the ability to push this out and inflate this part of their anatomy, so it looks like they're kind of pudgy on the face, like they're swollen. They like it. Here's what the back of the bird looks like, not too much to write home about, and the youngster. It's another picture of the youngster. And that's it. So that's my talk, and I'm going to stop sharing screen now and take any questions that you might have.
Would you discuss the difference in the color of their pupils? Like the last one was absolutely coal black. A lot of them were red.
No, I'm not going to discuss that because I'd have to really research that. I didn't really pay too much attention to the eye color. I do know that in the case of some of these grebes, the iris gets brighter, especially redder in breeding plumage, and then kind of fades to more of a brown in winter plumage. But that's about as far as I can go now. So what I can do is I can get an answer and send it to Patty, and she can distribute it to the members, if that's all right. I'll do that for you tomorrow.
I was just curious, so many of them, do they interbreed ever? I mean, or do they know their own breed each time?
Generally speaking, there is not much interbreeding, although the Clark's grebes can hybridize with the Western grebes. They don't do it very much because there tends to be geographic separation, but it has been noted in the past. We don't get any interbreeding with pie-billed grebes because that kind of breed of grebe, it's the only kind that we have here. But as we saw with that extinct Guatemalan grebe, which was quite similar to pie-billed grebes, they did interbreed. So it's not like they can't, but you have to be kind of closer related in order to succeed if you're going to interbreed. And it has more to do also with what your courtship rituals are like. So in that BBC clip that showed the Clark's grebes doing their dance, that was real similar to the Western grebe dance. As a matter of fact, I think the last dance they showed was probably Western grebes, and they didn't pay attention to that. It looked to me like Western grebes. So it would be easier for birds like that to interbreed because their courtship rituals are similar. But the courtship rituals for horned grebes and eared grebes are different. So it would be harder for them to get together and like each other, I think, or be attracted to each other. I think there are some reports of hybridization between eared grebes and horned grebes, but again, I'd have to research that more thoroughly. I sort of have this dim idea that there have been instances of that, but it's not something very common at all, if it even happens.
Thank you.
While Zoom is on, I'd like to ask mention three traditional things. First, I've put into chat Connie's email address, and she absolutely does love to get emails and will answer. Second, I've put into chat a little stimulus for everybody to be on the lookout for black guillemots. Because that would be a new state record, and I would love for people to be stimulated by one of Connie's talks to look for that. Every flock of pigeon guillemots, you should look at every guillemot, mindful that we're going to see one in the state one of these days. Third, I've put in a link to our son Alex Sidles' kayak blog, and he would be thrilled to know that the gray whales were back. So could I hear again from the person who said that the gray whales were back and where they were seen? Because I'll pass that on to Alex. That's all.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. There's somebody else who has their hand raised on the Zoom. Somebody else has a... John? I know, but there was one other one. It said one other one.
Just a quick answer for you, John. Actually, some of the gray whales have been back for at least a month. Orca Network has daily reports on where they're sighted, and today we had 2 in Snakelam Cove at the mouth of Penn Cove.
Thank you.
You'll see a wonderful orca report from Alex for Penn Cove.
Please speak up.
Do the grebes migrate, and or where's the best place to view them on Whidbey Island?
Some of them.
Did you hear that?
Yes, I did hear that. They sort of migrate, and it kind of depends on the species. So redneck grebes in particular do migrate because they don't nest around here. So they're mostly a winter bird. Same thing with the horned and eared grebes. That's why when we see them in breeding plumage, that tends to be for a short amount of time, and oftentimes it is not full breeding plumage, both in the spring before they leave and in the fall when they come back and they're still sort of partly in breeding plumage. Pie-billed grebes do migrate when in their far the northernmost habitat, but not in our state. They are year-round birds. Western grebes. Again, the whole issue with western grebes, they don't breed here. There are state records of breeding, but I don't know what the picture is on account of how sparse relatively they've become compared to back when the herring population was more stable for them. So I think, where are you going to see western grebes? Boy, that's a tough one too. I mean, it used to be so reliable that you could see them at Quartermaster Harbor, and that's just not the case. So I led a field trip out to Alki a couple of weeks ago, and we saw there were western grebes reported in Elliott Bay off of Alki. But when we got there on both Saturday and Sunday, just a couple of days later, there were no western grebes at all. So again, it's very iffy. Sometimes western grebes do show up in Lake Washington. They tend to be more saltwater dependent in the wintertime, but they will show up sometimes. So as far as Whidbey is concerned, the best I can do is to just say you're going to see them where you see them. My guess is that it's a little bit more likely that you would see them on the western side of the island, more the ocean side, and possibly in where the loons gather at Deception Pass. That might be a good place to find them, but reliably, I don't know. As far as Clark's grebes are concerned, yeah, go ahead.
Where I used to see them, Connie, was near Coopville. I would see them, western grebes.
Are you still doing that?
I haven't seen them recently.
Yeah, well, we've got some mid-island people here. What do they say?
Holmes Harbor.
Yeah, is that reliable?
Do you hear that for the Christmas bird count? Yes.
Oh, that is good. Yeah, that's good news. Oh, what kind of numbers did you get?
Numbers? Dozens.
Dozens. Oh, that's good news. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
We see horned grebes in Oak Harbor.
Horned grebes are very common in winter. They are everywhere. Eared grebes, the most reliable place I know to see eared grebes in the wintertime is Quartermaster Harbor and other waters around Vashon, especially near the ferry dock. That's usually a good place for winter eared grebes. But horned grebes, boy, they're not only can you see them all over the place, but in pretty good numbers. Not in flocks, but individually. But they seem like they're doing really, really well. Much better than a lot of the other grebes. And as for pie-billed grebes, those are freshwater birds, and you can see them year-round in most fresh waters. Now, Whidbey Island, boy, I'm going to have to... Deer Lagoon has them? Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Deer Lagoon, mm-hmm. Yes?
So when do the birds actually lose the plumage when they change colors, or does the feather change? Is that, or they're losing their feathers twice a year?
Yes, feathers, once the feather is grown, it cannot change color. So any change in plumage color is all due to molting. So one of the, that's an interesting area. I didn't get into this too much, but some people really like to understand the molting patterns of different bird species. Mind you, every bird species kind of has its own molting pattern. So some of the variations would be, let's say that you change into breeding plumage, which is true for almost all these species, although, you know, we have to look at the piebald grebe and say, you're not really doing that much, just a little bit. But when do you do it and how do you do it? And depending on the species, some of them will start to change from their winter plumage into their breeding plumage while they're down here in the wintertime. That's true for the horned grebe, the eared grebe, and the red-necked grebe. Western and Clark's don't do much. It's just mostly in their head feathers. And so by the time they get up to their breeding grounds, wherever that happens to be, most of them are probably pretty well changed, though some of them are probably still in transition. And then same thing coming down, they retain their breeding plumage while they're, even after they're finished nesting, and then maybe they start to change on the way down, but they're not going to change their flight feathers because they got to fly. And when they get down here, they still have remnants of their breeding plumage still showing, as we saw especially with the eared grebes. But it's different for every kind of species. So if you think about ducks, for example, think about mallards. So male mallards change their feathers too, right? They have those emerald green head feathers and that deep brown chest and the little curly back feathers on their rear ends and so on. What happens to them when they want to molt into their non-breeding plumage? Well, a lot of the waterfowl, including especially Canada geese, lose all their flight feathers at once. They just drop right out. And so these birds can't fly. Well, is that very smart? And the answer is, whoa, I don't know, because they can't fly. They become extremely vulnerable, and it looks like they disappear. So there are times in the year, like I'm going to say June and July, when you think, well, where have all the mallards gone? They must have migrated. No, they're still around, but the males anyway are all hiding because they've lost their flight feathers. They can't fly. They're very vulnerable. And as a strategy, they've adopted that. It seems to work for them, but it makes them vulnerable. And in particular, this was a contributing factor to the extinction of Eskimo curlews, because Eskimo curlews did the same thing. They dropped all their flight feathers. Well, when they were in the hundreds of thousands in numerous, it didn't matter if they were up in the Arctic, they dropped all their flight feathers and they couldn't escape from Arctic foxes. Who cares? Because there were so many of them, it didn't really matter, and the foxes couldn't eat everybody. But when they became table fare for hunters, and hunters were shooting them by the thousands to provide food for fancy restaurants, and the population got down, then it became critical when they dropped all their flight feathers and they got vulnerable to the foxes up north. And that was just a bad strategy, and they became extinct. So in terms of how much effort it takes to change these feathers, yeah, it's a lot of effort. And it takes a lot of energy, but they do it. So, for example, if you think about the very large family of passerines, which are all the songbirds, almost all of them change their feathers twice a year. They molt their feathers. So they drop the feathers that were in winter, and they put on new feathers. They grow new feathers that are colored in their breeding plumage. So right now, the yellow-rumped warblers are doing that. The males are getting bright yellow or bright white throats. That's a molt change. They're getting black feathers in various parts of their anatomy. That's a molt change. The only passerines that famously do not do that and change their feathers twice a year are the corvids. So crows are the biggest passerines, crows and ravens, and they do not molt twice a year. They only molt once a year. But the pattern that they molt is unique to them as well. So with crows, if you're talking about molting their flight feathers, they can't afford to drop all their feathers at once the way the Canada geese do. Crows have to fly. Canada geese at least can eat water plants. They can paddle, but crows can't do that. So instead what they do is they molt feather by feather, and they tend to do it symmetrically. So if they lose, let's say, a primary number 2 feather on the left wing, primary 2 feather on the right wing is going to fall off too. So when you see the raggedy-looking crows at certain seasons flying around, and you think, well, gosh, maybe a fox got at them or something. No, that's the way they molt. So one book that you can get that really goes into this in some detail is David Sibley's book, Bird Basics. That is not a basic book, contrary to its title. That is a complicated book. I've read it at least 3 times. And I still don't understand a lot of it, but he goes into that molting pattern. So just to talk about feather growth, can you stick around for a little bit? Can you want to see something? Can I show this, Patty? I'm going to share. And
how do you feel? Yes, sure.
All right. Here's something that I think is going to boggle your minds. Hang on a second here. This is the growth of a pennaceous feather. So pennaceous are like the flight feathers, tail feathers, that kind of thing. So I'll go through it a couple of times. So this is how it grows. So these feathers grow similarly to our hair. They start out with a kind of a follicle underneath the skin, and then a bump forms, and the cells keep pushing the bump upwards, and then the various feather structures form as the feather grows. So eventually the bump pokes through the skin and it keeps growing, being pushed from down below. It just gets longer and longer. And I'll take you through this another time here. Isn't this fascinating? Just love this stuff. All right. So, and boom, you have the feather. Okay, so this will cycle back here. Let's go back to the beginning. All right, so we start with a bump, just like with people, and it starts to grow. It pierces the skin. It keeps on growing, but it's pretty amorphous. It's being fed here by blood vessels, and then these bracts start to form and grow downwards toward the base, and they start to form a kind of a helix, a spiral. And then stuff starts to happen down here at the base where we form the rachis, which is the quill part. So here's the ventral barb ridge formation. That's eventually the quill, and that starts growing up. And the whole thing keeps twisting as it grows. Here's the twist. And these outer bracts here form a kind of a sheath to protect the growing feather inside. Mind you, once it gets to this point here, the blood supply stops. So the blood supply is still going on here. The growth is pushing forward. When the feather opens, and the sheath degenerates, so here we go. What happens then is all of this feather part here is, for all intents and purposes, dead. The only part of the feather that still is living is down below the surface in the follicle. And there, the follicle, I'm going to stop this. The follicle is supplied by blood, and it's controlled, it's got nerves and muscles. And the nerves can sense differences in how the feather's being moved, like let's say wind comes. The nerves can sense that, and the muscles can control each of those feathers minutely. So birds can make their feathers bend and twist and go up and go down as they please, basically. They have a lot of muscle memory, so that, I mean, if you have 20,000 feathers, boy, what a brain. But a lot of it is controlled autonomically, so it's not like conscious, sort of like we don't control our heartbeats very consciously. But some of it is controlled by what the bird wants to do. In the case of those pie-billed grebes, for example, they can raise up their feathers and trap air, and then the curvature of the feather, when they push it down, traps the air, and when they go underwater, that the bubbles kind of smooth out their traverse through the water. And if they want to compress their feathers and get rid of the air so they sink, they can do that too. So feathers are very complicated and wonderful. But just like if you were to take like some of your hair, for example, take the end of your hair and squeeze it as hard as you can you feel that? No, of course not, because that part of your hair is dead. If you pull on it, it hurts. You can feel that because you're pulling on the follicles that have nerve endings. That's just like with the feathers. So that was a long answer to a short question.
That was wonderful, Connie. Thank you. Thank you very much for presenting to us. You're always a wealth of information. Thanks again. Okay.
My pleasure.